I'm Tori.
I'm Savannah.
I'm Nicole.
George Bush once said, "America is never wholly herself unless she is engaged in high moral principle. We as a people have such a purpose today. It is to make kinder the face of the nation and gentler the face of the world." In an interview with Larry C., he told me that he remembers the days when George Herbert Walker Bush was president. He remembers him as a decent man who tried to do what was right. For this speech, I've used the following sources to gather information: AmericanHistory.about.com, NotableQuotes.com, Yahoo.com, Biography.com, MillerCenter.org, Wikipedia.org, and an interview with Larry C. Hi, my name is Anthony Gutierrez, and today I'm here to pay tribute to George H.W. Bush for his unwavering dedication throughout his life as a politician, for overcoming many difficult obstacles, and for preserving his legacy through his presidential library. George Bush once said, "A president is neither prince nor pope, and I don't seek a widow on men's souls. In fact, I yearn for a greater tolerance and easygoingness about each other's attitudes and way of life." One of the greatest accomplishments of George H.W. Bush was his successful life as a politician. In 1964, Bush ran an unsuccessful campaign for a U.S. Senate seat in Texas. 2 years later, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives and ultimately served 2 terms. Bush was later appointed to several important positions, including U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations in 1971 and Director of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1976. Bush aspired to the highest office in the United States, but he failed to win his party's nomination for the presidency in 1980. However, he was chosen by Ronald Reagan to serve as his running mate. Reagan won the 1980 election and was re-elected in 1984, with Bush serving as his vice president for both terms. Bush finally reached the White House in 1989. As president, he skillfully handled foreign affairs during a turbulent time, responding to the dissolve of the Soviet Union, the criminal acts of Manuel Noriega, and the invasion of Kuwait by Iraqi forces. Despite his global success, economic problems at home are to blame for the failure of his bid for re-election. George Bush once said, "You must feel responsibility to others. You must believe in serving others. I think that's a fundamental tenet of my life." As Diane Sawyer interviews former President Bush, he states, "A campaign is a disagreement, and disagreements divide. But an election is a decision, and decisions clear the way for harmony and peace." Throughout his life, George H.W. Bush has stressed the importance of public service and giving back to society. George H.W. Bush has spent much of his life serving his country, but he also knows the feeling of defeat. Despite many difficulties during Bush's life, he always found a way to overcome the difficulties. Despite losing to Bill Clinton in the 1992 presidential election, George H.W. Bush joined with Clinton in 2005 to help people rebuild their lives after Hurricane Katrina, which devastated the Gulf Coast region, especially Louisiana and Mississippi. The Bush-Clinton-Katrina Fund raised more than $100 million in donations in its first few months. In George H.W. Bush's personal life, he and his wife knew firsthand the difficulty of losing the one thing that means the most to any parent. Their daughter Robin, who was born in 1949, passed away from leukemia in 1953. In a recent interview with his granddaughter, he states that one of the first people he hopes to see when he makes it to heaven is his baby girl Robin. Despite many challenges throughout his life, the most difficult surely would have been to lose a child. Bush has overcome tough obstacles throughout his life, but he has done a noble job in preserving his legacy through his presidential library. A part of continuing George H.W. Bush's legacy is sponsoring his presidential library. The George Bush Presidential Library and Museum was dedicated on November 6, 1997, and soon after opened to the public. It is located on the west campus of Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. The library and museum holds the official documents and private papers from Bush's career, including his presidential years. The mission of the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum is to preserve and make available for research the official records, personal papers and artifacts of President George H.W. Bush to support democracy. promote civic education, and increase historical understanding of our nation's experience through the life and times of George Bush. George H.W. Bush frequently visits his presidential library. Larry C. has had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times while working security at the Bush Library. He always says how humble and respectful Bush is. George Bush always made it a point to speak to all the officers, including Mr. Larry. Larry said, "You can tell how much his presidential library means to him." George H.W. Bush will always be remembered because of his incredible presidential library, but beyond that, also due to his remarkable life. In conclusion, George H.W. Bush has been an inspiration to the entire world throughout his lifetime, including his life as a politician, overcoming obstacles and preserving his legacy through his presidential library. George H.W. Bush has accomplished so much during his 90 years on this earth. Bush recently said, "I've wondered about heaven. Who do you see when you get there? Who do you look up to? Who do you find them? Or how do you find them? There's a lot of people there. Maybe you look around, find some didn't make it too. I don't fear it though. When I was a little guy, I feared death. I'd worry about it. I'd be scared. Not anymore." I wouldn't say Bush is ready to die, but I would say he feels he has accomplished much to be remembered by when his time does come.